All right, let's talk a little bit about Chapter 2 in the Experience Economy textbook. The title of this chapter is Setting the Stage. Of course, when you're talking about staging experiences and setting the stage, you start where we always start. That is, what's the core experience? And of course, staging experiences is not about entertaining individuals, it's about engaging them. The experience needs to be interactive. This is easily the most confusing chapter in the book. So if you read it and when you got done you were confused, congratulations. You're just like everyone else who's read this chapter over the past 20 years. It talks about something called the experience sphere, and then it talks about realms, the 4 realms, and then it talks about the 2 axes. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about the axes. And so the axes, on one end we have passive participation, and on the other end we have active participation. So if you didn't know any better, you would think that this is some sort of a continuum. It turns out that it's not, by the way, but you would think that possibly. When they refer to passive participation, they are talking about the notion of watching, viewing, or observing an experience or an event. So if you go to a golf tournament and you watch the golf tournament, that is passive participation. On the other end of the spectrum, though, is active participation. Doing, participating, being involved. You are the person that determines what happens next. And so the active side would be, instead of going to a golf tournament and watching, it would be actually playing golf. So if you were playing golf, you would be an active participant. If you were watching a friend of yours play golf, you would be a passive participant. The top and bottom are absorption and immersion. And if you didn't know any better, you would think that these are at opposite ends of a spectrum and that they're on a continuum. Once again, you wouldn't be right. Under the notion of absorption, it's the experience goes into the guest. And so this usually means that, that the experience is more mental than physical. Immersion is when the guest becomes part of the experience. That is, the guest goes into the experience. They are immersed in the experience. It is sort of like a virtual reality situation where you can see 360 degrees. You are then immersed. You are, some of the video games have the kind of helmets on, and you have those kind of helmets or goggles on, so that you get the sense that you are immersed in the setting. Now, this then becomes, the immersion side of this becomes the more physical side of things. Sort of mental versus physical, absorption versus immersion. Now, it turns out that none of this really matters much because these are not on a continuum, and so it's not as you get further up the absorption, you get further from the immersion, because they can be, something can be both an absorption experience and an immersion experience. It can turn out that an activity can be both passive and active. So this is where the confusion starts. You have axes that are not like traditional axes that you're familiar with. Then you have the 4 realms of the experience, and the 4 realms of the experience are entertainment, educational, aesthetic, and escapist. Now this is a little bit hard to understand, and you'll note, by the way, if you go up online and you pull down the 4 realms of the experience economy, you'll find all kinds of different charts in here, okay? But obviously then, as you look at this, an educational realm, the educational realm is someone who is an experience that is absorbed into the individual. That is, it is mentally stimulating. It's sort of a brain-based, thinking-based experience, and you're an active participant. So education would be an active mental activity. Meanwhile, watching a scary movie would be a passive mental activity. The escapist realm is an active participant physical activity. So this would be something like, probably the best example is whitewater rafting. All right, and so entertainment might be you're watching a movie. Educational is that you're learning something and you're really actively involved in it. You are an active participant. The passive participant immersion is called the aesthetic realm, and this is probably the most confusing realm. But this is sort of you going to an event rather than watching it on television. So this is somehow you are immersed in the event, but you're not an active participant. So you're at the Super Bowl, and you're doing the wave and you're cheering and booing and all that sort of stuff. But you're not really participating in the event in terms of playing in the game. So this is an aesthetic realm. Now, it turns out that these realms kind of get to be sort of funny. For instance, one of the terms that we like to use a lot is something called edutainment. Well, where does this fit? Where does edutainment fit in this? Is it entertainment or is it educational? Now, all kinds of people who have looked at the realms of an experience have modified it themselves. And so the 4 realms of the experience from Pine and Gilmore are, as you can see in the black lettering here, entertainment, educational, aesthetic, and escapist. Well, so Bert Schmidt and a couple of his colleagues who are all knowledgeable about experiential marketing, they make up their own 4 quadrants. Their 4 quadrants are emotional, intellectual, sensory, and act and relate. I don't know. Then Mathwick, Malhotra, and Rigdon, who I'm not that familiar with, they come along and they say, no, the 4 quadrants are, the 4 realms or the 4 quadrants are service excellence, I don't know where that came from, CROI, customer return on investment, aesthetics, and playfulness. Then Vasquez and Chen come along and they come up with emotional, flow experience, and cognitive, sensory, and interactivity and relational. By the way, none of these are right. None of these make any sense. But it does go to show that even skilled intellectuals who spend some real time thinking about this don't have any idea what they're talking about or what anybody else is talking about. And that's because this is a sort of a difficult concept, and it's not made any easier by the drawings. So think about the dimensions. Watching something on TV versus being at the event and watching. Are these the same? And the answer is, of course not. Watching a football game on TV and being at that football game are very, very different experiences. And you're much more likely to have memorable experiences by actually attending the game than you are watching it on television. Entertainment is passively absorbed. Well, it depends what the entertainment is, doesn't it? Educationally is actively absorbed. Well, some students don't seem to be very actively absorbed in their studies. So what is the fallacy in this? Well, example of a fallacy in this is, where does edutainment go? A person escapes into a fantasy world by actively becoming part of the experience. So the notion of escapism obviously falls in the bottom half of the realms, both the aesthetic and the escapist. Now, the only thing about the realms of the experience that makes this a little bit more confusing is this particular table. Now, don't worry about the stuff in white. That's all wrong. But look at the middle of this realm. This is what Pine and Gilmore were trying to explain, and that is the richest experiences encompass all aspects of the realms. So the sweet spot is not in one of the quadrants. This isn't a classification pedagogy. This is this notion that the best experiences are some that are entertaining, educational, escapist, and aesthetic. Except even that doesn't really make much sense. But the notion is, and in case this comes up on an exam, the sweet spot is a little bit of all of them. So in most cases when you have a chart like this, the goal is to get as far out on the scales as you can. In this case, the goal is to get in the middle of the table, or in this case, the figure. So then we have the four realms: entertainment, educational, escapism, and aesthetics. The entertainment value of an experience, the educational value of an experience. Sort of like, even if you go to visit someplace and they say Washington slept here. Well, that's what? That's an educational value. That's when you go to the zoo and you're watching the penguins and you're being entertained by the penguins, but you also learn something about those penguins. Maybe it's providing background information or whatever, but it is sort of this notion of augmented reality to provide extra information so that you know more about what's going on. Then there's escapism. This is this notion of going where no man has gone before, physically becoming part of the experience. This is the difference between playing golf and watching golf, between racing a car and watching cars race. And then, of course, it's the aesthetics. The atmosphere, does it look like it's supposed to look? Is it inviting? This is the overall experience of being there. Not necessarily participating, but just being there. All right, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to end today with words that experiential marketers use to try to measure whether or not the core experience was successful, and whether or not you're doing a good job of staging the experiences. So you can sort of plug stuff in. Was the experience memorable? Was it fun? Was it engaging? Was it entertaining? Was it consuming? Was it interesting? Was it thought-provoking? Was it pleasurable, cool, amusing, valuable, impressive, terrific? You'll notice that these are all adjectives that are designed to talk about the individual's reaction to the experience. So when you're thinking about experiences, rather than thinking about was someone satisfied, think about these sorts of terms instead.